adding and subtracting fractions. So we're going to start by determining the least common denominator for each set of fractions. So when I do this, I am going to start by finding the multiples of the denominator. And remember that the denominator is the number that is in the bottom. So I'm going to start with my 3. So we have 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. And now I'm going to move on to 4. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. And 4 times 3 is 12. So I can keep going, but I don't need to because I can see that they have 12 in common already. So I know that 12 is going to be the least common multiple, or in this case, the least common denominator. So you'll often see least common denominator abbreviated as LCD, like I have written here. And so our LCD is 12. So we're going to do that again, but this time for 4 sevenths and 1 sixth. So our denominator, we have 7, and then we have 6. So I'm going to write out my multiples. So I've gone ahead and written out our multiples. So for 7, I have 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, and 49. For 6, I have 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, and 42. And so when I look at these, I can see that they both have a number in common, and they both have the number 42 in common. So our LCD is going to be 42. So now for our last problem, we have 3 numbers, and so we need to find the common denominator amongst all 3 numbers. So I have 6, 12, and 8, and I'm going to start by finding the multiples. So I've gone ahead and listed out our multiples. So for 6, I have 6, 12, 18, 24, and 30. For 12, I have 12, 24, 36, 48, and 60. And for 8, I have 8, 16, 24, 32, and 40. So I'm going to be looking for the number that they all have in common, and that's all 3. Because, like, for example, both 6 and 12 have 12 in common, but 8 does not have 12. So all 3 have to have the same number in common, and I can see that all 3 have 24 in common, so our LCD is going to be 24. So when we are adding and subtracting fractions, it is important to remember these steps. And so step 1 is to find the least common denominator of the fractions, just like we did in the first 3 examples. After you find the least common denominator, then you're going to rename each fraction. And when we start getting into practice problems, you will see what I mean by renaming each fraction. Then you can add or subtract the numerator, and we leave the denominator the same. And then our last step is to regroup and simplify if needed. All right, so let's practice. In this example, I have 3/5 plus 1/3. So I need to start by finding our least common denominator. So I'm going to start by finding our multiples. So I've written out some multiples for us. So for 3, I have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. For 5, I have 5, 10, 15, and 20. And I can see that they both have 15 in common. So our LCD is going to be 15. So now I'm going to take my fractions. I'm just going to rewrite them. And I am going to multiply the bottom number by what we would multiply to get 15. So for 5, I would need to multiply by 3 to get 15. And for 3, I would need to multiply by 5 to get 15. And the thing you have to remember is that whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So I also need to go up here and multiply 3 by 3 and then go to my other fraction and multiply 1 by 5. So now I'm going to go ahead and multiply those together. So 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 5 is 15, so that becomes 9/15. 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15, so that becomes 5/15. And now I can add together. Remember, the denominator is going to stay the same, so our denominator is going to remain 15. So now I just need to add 9 and 5 together, and I get 14. So our answer is 14/15. All right, in our next problem, we have 3/8 minus 1/4. So again, I'm going to start by finding our multiples. So I've gone ahead and written out our multiples. So for 8, I have 8, 16, 24. And for 4, I have 4, 8, 12, and 16. And I can see that both of them have 8 in common, and that is the smallest number that they have in common, because they also have 16 in common, but we are looking for the smallest number that they have in common. So our LCD here is going to be 8. So I don't need to change anything to 3/8. It's just going to stay the same, but I do need to change 1/4. And I'm going to do that by multiplying by 2, because 4 times 2 is 8. And remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So now I'm going to have 3/8 minus 2/8. And now I can go ahead and subtract. So our denominator stays the same. That's going to stay 8. So all I have to do is 3 minus 2, which is 1. So my answer is 1/8. All right, so in our next example, we have 1/2 plus 5/6. So I'm going to start by finding our multiples of 2 and 6 so that I can find my least common denominator. So I've written some of them out. So for 2, I have 2, 4, 6, and 8. And for 6, I have 6, 12, and 18. So I can see that they both have 6 in common. And obviously, if I keep going, they will have more numbers in common. But I'm looking for the smallest number they have in common. So that is 6. So I have 1/2 plus 5/6. I don't need to change 5/6 because we're using 6 as our least common denominator, but I need to rename 1/2. So I'm going to do that by multiplying by 3, because 3 times 2 is 6. And whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I have to multiply the numerator by 3 as well. So now let's go ahead and change our fraction. So 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. And we can go ahead and add that to 5/6. Our denominator will stay the same. It will be 6. 3 plus 5 is 8. Now this is what we call an improper fraction. So we need to change it into a mixed number. And how I'm going to do that is I know that 6 can go into 8 once, so that would be 1 whole. And I'm just simply going to subtract 8 minus 6, which is 2. So I know that I have 2/6 left over. Now you can leave it as 1 and 2/6. That is fine, but we can simplify even further because 2 can go into 6, and I can do that by dividing by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So now my answer is 1 1/3. And so again, we just want to make sure that we are simplifying to the best of our ability. Okay, so now we might have some cases where we have mixed numbers. And now this one is easy, and I like this one because 2/5 is not going to give us any problems with 1/3, because when I subtract, we know that 2 is bigger than 1 and 5 is bigger than 3. So how exactly do we subtract these two mixed numbers? Well, we're going to start by finding our least common denominator. And yes, there's a little checklist for you in the left-hand corner. And so what is our least common denominator? Now, in our other examples, I was showing you how to do it with multiples. When we have numbers like 5 and 3, we can also just multiply them together. So I know that 5 times 3 is 15. So I know that a common denominator is going to be 15. And I also know, because we've written out the multiples for this in a previous example, that 15 is also going to be the least common denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite our fractions. So I have 2/5 and 1/3. I need to multiply 5 by 3. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. Multiply 3 by 5. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So now my fractions are going to be 6/15 and 5/15. So now I'm going to go ahead and add those back to our whole numbers. So I'm going to have 2 and 6/15 minus 1 and 5/15. Now I'm going to break this apart. So I'm going to take my two whole numbers and subtract those. So 2 minus 1 equals 1. And now I'm going to take our two fractions, which was 6/15 and 5/15, and subtract those. And 6 minus 5 is 1. The denominator stays the same. And now I just need to attach that fraction to our whole number up here for an answer of 1 and 1/15. All right, our next example, we have 4 and 1/2 plus 1 and 1/3. So again, I need to find that least common denominator. And I'm going to do it just like we did last time, just by multiplying. 2 times 3 equals 6. So that's going to be our least common denominator. I need to rename our fractions. So in order to get to 6, I have to multiply 2 by 3. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Go over to 1/3, I'd multiply that by 2 to get to 6, and whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Now I can go ahead and rewrite our problem. So I'm going to have 4 and 3/6 plus 1 and 2/6. And I'm going to go ahead and add. I'm going to start by adding our whole numbers. 4 plus 1 equals 5. And then I'm going to go add our fractions. 3/6 plus 2/6 is equal to 5/6. And now I just need to attach that fraction to our whole number, and I will get an answer of 5 and 5/6. So when we're subtracting mixed numbers, you may need to regroup the whole number into its fractional parts. Okay, so that means 1 whole would be the same thing as 8/8, or 8/8. 1 whole would also be the same as 5/5, or written as 5/5. 2 wholes would be 1 whole and 3/3, or 3/3. So in previous lessons, we had talked about how whole numbers can also be written over 1. However, for these purposes, it might also be easier to write them as a fractional part. So 8/8, or 5/5, or 3/3, rather than 8/1. All right, so our first example is 1 minus 2/7. And I need to turn 1 into a fraction, so I'm going to put it over 1. So I'm going to just rewrite it. So we have 1/1 minus 2/7. And I need to find my least common denominator. And I know that 1 times 7 is equal to 7. So that's going to be our least common denominator. So I don't need to change 2/7. I just need to change 1/1. And I'm going to do that by multiplying the denominator by 7, and then multiplying our numerator by 7. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 1 is 7. So I'm going to have 7 sevenths minus 2 sevenths. Denominator stays the same. That will be 7. 7 minus 2 is 5. So our answer is 5 sevenths. All right, so our next example is 2 minus 3 tenths. So I'm going to start by writing 2 over 1. And then I'm just going to simply rewrite our problem. So we have 2 over 1 minus 3 tenths. And now I need to find our least common denominator, which is pretty simple because I know that 1 times 10 is 10. So we're just going to use 10. So our least common denominator is going to be 10. So I can leave 3 tenths alone. I don't need to touch it. So I'm going to go over here and multiply 10 by 1, and then multiply 10 by 2, and then rewrite that fraction as 20 over 10, so 20 tenths, and then 3 tenths. And we are subtracting here. So our denominator is going to stay the same. It's going to stay 10, and 20 minus 3 is 17. And again, we have an improper fraction. And so I know that 10 can go into 17 once, and if you're never sure, you can just do the simple division. Set it up, right? 10 can go into 17 once. 1 times 10 is 10. Subtract. I have 7 left over. So I know that I have 1 whole and then 7 tenths, which is our answer. All right, so our next example is 5 minus 3 twentieths. So I'm going to have 5 over 1 minus 3 twentieths. So I'm just going to rewrite that. All right, and I know that 1 times 20 will give me 20. So we're not going to touch 3 twentieths. Instead, I'm going to use our least common denominator of 20, and I'm going to multiply by 20. So 1 times 20 is 20. 5 times 20 is 100, and then I'm going to have 3 twentieths. And we're going to subtract. 100 minus 3 is 97. Denominator stays the same, and we get 20. Now, this is an improper fraction, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure how many times 20 can go into 97. So this is a time where you would definitely need to do some long division. So I know that 20 can't go into 9, but I know 20 can go into 97. So, 20, 40, 60, 80. So I know it can go in 4 times, because if it goes in 5 times, we're going to get 100. So I have 80. I'm going to subtract. 7 minus 0 is 7. 9 minus 8 is 1. So my answer is going to be 4 and 17 twentieths. So our next example, I have 2 1/4 minus 3/4. So in the previous examples, we could easily do subtraction like this because the bigger fraction was in the front. But in this example, the bigger fraction is not in the front. And if we were to subtract it this way using that same method we did at the beginning of the lesson, we would get a negative number, which makes no sense for this example. So I'm going to take my 2 1/4 and I'm going to turn that into an improper fraction. And I'm going to do this by multiplying my denominator and my whole number. And then I'm going to add my numerator. So I'm going to say 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. And our denominator stays the same. So now I have 9/4. And 9/4 is bigger than 3/4, so we're not going to have a problem here now. So 9 minus 3 is 6. I have 4 over 4, which is 4. So I know that 4 can go into 6 one time, but I need to know how much is left over. So I'm going to do 6 minus 4, which gives me 2. So I have 1 and 2/4. Now I can simplify 2/4 even further because I know that 2 times 2 is 4. So 4 can be divided by 2. So I can simplify this to 1 and 1/2, which is our answer. All right, so our next example is 7 1/8 minus 2 3/4. So just like I did in the previous example, we're going to turn our mixed numbers into improper fractions. And I'm going to do that by multiplying the denominator and the whole number and then adding the numerator. And I'm going to do that on both sides. So 8 times 7 is 56, plus 1 is 57. Our denominator stays the same, so that would be 8. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11, and the denominator stays the same. And I know that 4 can go into 8, so I don't need to find multiples or anything like that. So I'm going to multiply 4 by 2, because 4 times 2 is 8, which means I need to multiply our numerator by 2. And now I'm going to rewrite our problem. So 57 over 8, because I don't need to do anything to that, minus 11 times 2 is 22 over 8. And now I can subtract. So our denominator is going to stay the same. And 57 minus 22 is 35. And so now I need to figure out how many times can 8 go in to 35. And I know that 8 times 4 is 32. So I know that it can go in 4 times. And then 35 minus 32 is 3. So my answer is 4 3/8. So our next example is 5 1/6 minus 1 2/3. So I'm going to go ahead and turn our mixed number into an improper fraction. So 6 times 5 is 30, plus 1 is 31, over 6. 1 times 3 is 3, plus 2 is 5. So I have 31/6 minus 5/3. Now I need our least common denominator. I know that 3 can go into 6, so I'm not going to change 31/6. And to get to 6, I need to multiply by 2. So 3 times 2, and then 5 times 2. I'm going to rewrite that. So 31 over 6 minus 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 2 is 6. So I have 31/6 minus 10/6. Now I can go ahead and subtract. Denominator stays the same. And 31 minus 10 is 21. So now I need to change our improper fraction into a mixed number. So I need to think, how many times can 6 go into 21? So I know 6 times 4 is 24. So that means it has to be 3, which is 18. So I'm going to do 21 minus 18, which is equal to 3. So I have 3/6. But I can simplify even further because I know that 3 is half of 6. So I can turn that into 3 1/2. Remember, we want to simplify when we can. All right, next question. So on Wednesday, Leah rode the city bus for 3.5 miles. On Thursday, she rode the bus for 4 1/4 miles. How much farther did Leah ride the bus on Thursday than Wednesday? So we need to find out how much further she rode the bus on Thursday. So that's telling me that we need to subtract. So I'm going to write our problem. So we're going to have 4 1/4 minus 3 1/2. So now I need to make sure we have our least common denominator. And I know that 2 can go into 4, so our least common denominator will be 4. So I need to change the 1/2. Multiply that by 2 to get 2/4. So now I need to take our fractions and turn them into improper fractions because I can see that my fractions are bigger on the left than they are on the right, which means that I would get a negative number. And that's going to make absolutely no sense. So I multiply my denominator by my whole number and then add the top number. So 4 times 4 is 16, plus 1 is 17. So I'm going to have 17 over 4. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. 4 times 3 plus 2. So 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. And now I can go ahead and subtract. Denominator stays the same. 17 minus 14 is 3. So she rode the bus 3/4 miles further. All right, last problem. So we have a triangle here, and our perimeter, so all 3 sides added together, is 6 feet. But we don't know what x is. So we need to find out what x is. So in order to do that, I'm going to start by taking what we do know and adding them together. So I'm going to have 1 and 7/8 plus 2 and 1/2. I need a least common denominator, and I know that 2 can go into 8 because 2 times 4 is 8. So we're going to go with 8. So I'm going to leave 1 and 7/8. I don't need to change that. I just need to change 1/2, multiply the bottom by 4, multiply the top by 4. So now I have 4/8, and now I can go ahead and add. So I can start by adding our whole numbers together. So 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. And then I can take our fractions, 7/8 plus 4/8. 7 plus 4 is 11 over 8. Now that's an improper fraction. So I know that we need to add some other whole number to 11. So I'm going to say 11 minus 8 is equal to 3. So I'm going to go over here and add one more. So we have 4, and then take my remainder, which is 3/8. So for right now, 2 sides is equal to 4 and 3/8. So now I'm going to use that number, and I'm going to subtract it from 6. So I have 6 minus 4 and 3/8. And when I do this, it is going to give me the answer for x. So I'm going to start by putting 6 over 1 and turning 4 and 3/8 into an improper fraction. So 8 times 4 is 32, plus 3 is 35. I can use 8 as our least common denominator, because 1 times 8 is 8. So I'm going to go over here, multiply the denominator by 8, multiply the numerator by 8. So now I'm going to have 48/8 minus 35/8. Denominator will stay 8. 48 minus 35 is 13. I know that 8 can go into 13 once. I just need to know how much is remaining. So 13 minus 8 is equal to 5. So 5/8. So x is 1 and 5/8 feet. All right, so before you begin your homework for today, please make sure you summarize an important thing that you learned today about adding and subtracting fractions.